Jackie Woodside is a certified professional coach and licensed psychotherapist for over 25 years experience in those fields. She's authored 2 best-selling books, Calming the Chaos, which many of you have read already, A Soulful Guide to Managing Your Energy Rather Than Your Time. Excellent premise. And the other book is Time for a Change. They're both out in the hallway if you want to take one home today. Inc. magazine selected the book Calming the Chaos as one of the top 10 motivational books of 2015. And Jackie has been leading spiritual retreats, offering professional development training, and keynote speeches around the country. She delivered her first TED Talks in 2012 and has been a guest faculty member at Unity Institute and Seminary. She has also been on the faculty of the Massachusetts Executive in Health and Human Service Monitoring and Leadership Program. Mentoring. I need a little monitoring myself. And my favorite, she's the former board president of Unity on the River in Amesbury, which is our sister church, and is dedicated to igniting the flames of infinite possibilities in all our lives. Please give a warm Unity on Cape Cod welcome to Jackie Woodside.
Oh my. Hi. How are you guys doing? Great. It's awesome to be back. Thank you for having me back, Tony. He's awesome. I'm so glad he's here. Oh, thank you. Thank you. There, I should turn myself on too, although I hate doing that publicly. It's so embarrassing. Don't tell anybody. It's rough when I start like that. You guys' music is beautiful. You have an amazing voice. You said we should all vote for love. I actually wrote a blog post called exactly that the week before the election, Vote for Love. So here we are, right? Wow. This is one of my favorite lines from, am I making noise? Is that me? That click, 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 click. Do I sound like a horse coming down the click, click, click? All right, sorry. Equipment malfunction. Good, take it off. Take it off. I'm just getting started. It's not easy being me. So one of my favorite lines from the Hamilton musical. How many of you are aware of the musical Alexander Hamilton that's sweeping Broadway? Extraordinary piece of work by Lin-Manuel Miranda. He had this brilliant idea of writing a musical about the life of our founding father, Alexander Hamilton. And when he told his wife about that, she's like, yeah, good luck with that. So, it doesn't sound like it's all that exciting and all that riveting, but he wrote this riveting story about Alexander Hamilton's life and about the founding of this country through the medium of our language today, which is rap and hip-hop, some jazz, and the cast is mirroring who we are as a society today. It's Black and Asian and Hispanic and white people all just doing this extraordinary job. And one of my favorite lines from that show is, look around, how lucky we are to be alive right now. History is in the making, and we just happen to be in the middle of it. Look around. It's been an interesting week, hasn't it? I think people were certainly shocked and stunned by the events, including people who were supporting President-elect Trump. People, I think, were really shocked that the turn of events. And then look around at how lucky we are to be alive right now. Our country has made incredible strides. Look at what's happened just really in the last decade or so. After 246 years of slavery ended, 100 years after that, Black people had the right to vote, and many, many years after that, 46 years after that, we elected our first African-American president. So 246 years of slavery, 100 years after that, Black people have the right to vote. 44 years after that, we elected our first Black president. I was really proud about that. I don't know about you, but I was like, this is awesome. And then the Stonewall riots, 45 years after the Stonewall riots. Does everyone know what that is? The Stonewall riots were an incident that occurred in New York City where police went in and brutalized some men in a gay bar. And it really, and the riots that ensued afterwards, saying people have a right to their identity, people have a right to love in all its forms. It was the beginning of the gay rights movement, if you will, the civil rights movement for gay rights. So it's called the Stonewall Riots. 45 years after that, the Supreme Court decided that love in all of its forms should be honored, privileged, and recognized. And that happened in the last decade. It's extraordinary. And then 96 years after women received the right to vote, we as a collective nation put up our first female president as a president-elect candidate. And of course, it didn't go the way some of us would have hoped. But those are tremendous, tremendous gains just in our lifetime. Like, look around at what's happening in our world. And still, violence against black men by police has escalated. A black man is 5 times more likely to be shot by a police officer than anyone else in our population. The incidence of violence against gays and lesbians has been higher in this past year than at any time in recent history. The incident in Orlando notwithstanding. And then this turn of events where we had perhaps one of the most experienced candidates that was not chosen, and she was a woman. So we have all of these incredibly progressive movements and socially in our culture, and still. So the question for us is, how do we be with the whole of that? How do I be with the truth that we are one and our belief in unity that we are one people, and yet deal with this disparity? This really is what's calling on all of our hearts right now, isn't it? How do we forward the progress that we've made toward unity and oneness? I mean, I was just downright giddy these last few weeks, just like thinking, here we go, this is the next major step, really, in humanity, declaring its oneness here in this nation, and still. So I want to look at that. So how do we grapple with that, this incredible progression towards oneness and peace and unity, and still this seeming movement in a different direction? And my belief is that how we respond to that is by really understanding and standing ever more deeply into our soul's purpose. Standing ever more deeply into our soul's purpose. And you'd be like, all right, I would do that if I knew what that was. Right? I mean, you have to grapple with this. So let's just dig in right there. What is our purpose? What's our soul's purpose? What's our soul's purpose in our expression? And my belief is that we are all here as spiritual beings having a human experience to grow and elevate in consciousness. We are spiritual beings. We are energetic beings. And our energy is all about the energetic consciousness that we have. But what makes up my consciousness? What makes up my consciousness? What makes up my consciousness is my ability, my beliefs, my love, my attitudes, the vibe that I have is what makes up my energetic consciousness. You know, like you meet somebody and like immediately like, oh yeah, I like their vibe. And you're like all connected with them, and then you meet somebody else and you're like, I'm not so sure. Like attracts like on the energetic plane. So when you are vibing with someone, when you share the same attitudes, the same thoughts, the same beliefs, the same sense of love and perspective, you have a similar vibe. So that's what I mean. So we're here as spiritual beings having a human experience to grow in our energetic consciousness back to the divinity from which we came. That's what we're here to do. So, how do you do that? Are you on board with me with that? Like, that's what we're here for. To grow from the lower levels of consciousness and fear and separation and division and hatred and apathy, to grow beyond that into, the place of oneness, the place of peace, the place of equanimity. the place of unconditional love. That's what we're here to do. So how do you do that? So the first thing that I think about when you do that is the way that you elevate your consciousness is you change what you think and what you believe. You change what's running you. So when you identify these lower consciousness states that are working in you, you identify these places that are not reflective of the God that you are, your Christ essence bringing forth. You identify that and you elevate it. In other words, you choose your thinking and you choose your feelings. You know, it says in A Course in Miracles that you think that you're not responsible. You think you're responsible for what you do, but not for what you think. The truth is, you are responsible for your thinking because it is out of your thinking that your behavior gives rise, is manifest. Right? So you've got to get to the level of recognizing, I am responsible for how I think. And it's easy because the truth is, most of us aren't. Most of us aren't. Most often, what's happening in your head, honestly, is not thinking. It's mia, 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 mia. You've heard it before. Mia, 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 mia. Oh, I like that, and I don't like that, and why'd he say that, and why'd she say that, and why did we do that, and why is this happening, and this should be happening, and this shouldn't be happening. Mia, 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 mia. That's not thinking. That, in fact, is your thoughts thinking you. Too often, we confuse mental meandering for thinking. It's not thinking. Thinking is determining, oh, wait, this is what I value and this is what I believe, therefore, this is what I will now think. This is what I value, this is what I believe, therefore, this is how I will now feel. Now, I understand it's not that easy. Do you know why? You haven't trained your consciousness to live that way. You haven't trained your neurology to process the world that way. You are still, some of you, maybe you're all evolved over this and I'm just, blowing smoke up here, I don't know. But many, I'm going to just assume, some of you maybe sometimes, that's better, have a stimulus response reaction to life. This happens, I respond this way. Oh my God, I can't believe that's been who's elected president. Things are going to be awful and the economy's going to tank and stimulus response. What we need to do as people committed to new thought living and to the beliefs in unity that we are one and that our thoughts become our reality, our thoughts become outpictured in our world, our job is to start interrupting that stimulus response pattern and to say, wait a minute, I don't have to think this way. I don't have to feel this way. Really, you don't. I promise you. When you feel crappy, here's what I recommend. Do something different. Do something different. Like, I'm just going to sit here and feel crappy. No! Do something different. Like, engage yourself differently. You have the capacity as a spiritual being having a human experience to recognize what's happening in your consciousness and to alter it. You see, I know, I sometimes go at odds with people that are like really into their feeling nature. And I was a therapist for 25 years. Like, I really do love that. And if your expression as a spiritual being is only guided by how you feel, you will not evolve to the highest levels of consciousness. I promise you, you will not. Your feeling nature is part of your human nature. It is not part of your divinity until you get up into the higher realms of emotion. When you're in the emotional states of despair, when you're in the emotional states of depression, you are not experiencing and expressing your God force energy coming through you. And what's yours to do in the face of that is recognize, I can choose a different state. How do you do that? By shifting from emotion to intellect. Yes, you just talk yourself the heck out of it. You just talk yourself the heck out of it. Like, and I'm a survivor, by the way, of clinical depression, years and years and years of clinical depression. One of the ways that I would get myself mobilized out of those depressive states is I would be like, how many of you have ever been depressed? You don't have to admit it, but it's like, there's that heaviness, right? And then as I was getting better, I would start using my thinking like, okay, what's happening in my life right now? I'm fine. I'm healthy. I have enough money in the bank. My marriage is just fine. My kid is just fine. I'm living a life that is actually lovely, that a lot of people would be really happy to be living. Shut up. Get yourself going. And I could think my way out of the lower level of emotion. So using intellect to overcome emotion. However, we don't want to stop there, do we? Because intellect is also a cap. It also has its cap in not engaging the fullness of divinity. So what you want to do when you get really good at living your life in the higher levels of emotion, you no longer just run by the responsiveness of what's happening in your world. This happens, I have this response. You've actually transcended that through the disciplined use of your intellect. Then what you can go is actually to begin living your life fully engaged in your intuitive nature. Most people can't go from the lower depths of emotional muck-a-muck to living the fullness of their intuitive nature, their enlightened nature, their awakened nature. So when you get really good at shifting from emotion, I can use my intellect. Thoughts become things. Think a new thought, right? Think a different thought. Then you can move into these higher realms and be lived by your awakened intuitive nature. There was someone in my life that just was such a profound example of this for me, and it was my grandmother, Woodside, who was just this lovely woman and outgoing. She was the school librarian, and she went to the Methodist Church. She volunteered for, what was that they give the daffodils? Cancer Society? Yeah, remember that? You'd give some daffodils and fundraiser for cancer. So I remember her table being filled with daffodils, and there'd be people coming and going, and she'd be managing that. She was just a lovely, engaged human being. And when I was a young child, my grandmother went through this experience that was just mind-blowing to the whole community. First thing that happened was my dad, actually her son, was killed in a car accident very unexpectedly. And my grandma, of course, was traumatized by that, my mother, and it was a big thing. We live in a small farming town. But Grandma really kind of focused her energies on helping to my mom, and she was great. Well, 6 months after that, her next son, my Uncle Harry, died in a car accident. It's freak, right? I mean, who does that? Who experiences things like that? And it was really difficult. The whole community kind of rushed behind her, and she got through it. 3 months later, her husband died in a car accident. So in 9 months' time, my grandmother lost her 2 sons and her husband, all unexpectedly, all in car accidents. Now put that back in the context of what I said, that we can be given by our reactivity and our emotion, or we can choose a higher way. So whenever I'm confronted with something that I just can't wrap my head around, kind of like this week, I look to the example of my grandmother because you know what? She wasn't devastated. She went through a horrific grief reaction, but how I remember her throughout my whole life, happy, active, engaged, volunteering, church-going, loving, faith-filled. She devoted so much of her life to taking care of me and my brother and sister and just really being engaged in a loving way. Which brings me to my next point of how you live your soul's purpose. You live your soul's purpose not just by thinking with your head and what you might do with your life and what decisions you might make with your life, but by actually thinking with your heart. Engaging your heart center. Because what would most people do, right, if they went through what my grandmother went through? I don't know. What would you do? Leave the country, right? There's a lot of that talk going on right now. Did you hear what happened the night of the election? Do you know what server went down? Did you hear? Yeah. How did the Canadian immigration website literally crashed? Right? So there's that. I'd leave the country. I would withdraw. I might be bitter, angry, right? So, and in the face of circumstances that I can't wrap my head around, I think about my grandmother because she didn't do any of that. She just got engaged. She was thinking with her heart. And because she was living her life through her heart center rather than her head that would say, why me? And this isn't fair. And I'm just going to crawl under a rock. I can't take this anymore. All of those thoughts that anyone might normally have. Instead of having those thoughts, she came from her heart center and said, thank God I have my grandkids, for which I am eternally grateful for, that's where she put her grief, because my mother had also lost her husband. So I was blessed with that amazing example of somebody who was willing to think with their heart. And then when I was a middle schooler, I remember this very cool experience that just demonstrates proof positive that she was living through her heart center, not through her head. Her college roommate had fallen ill with cancer, and she knew she was dying. And she said, so it was my grandmother's college roommate. So she said to her husband, look, I'm going to be gone soon. When I'm gone, I want you to go find Grace Woodside. She's a lovely woman. She's had too much tragedy in her life, and she shouldn't be alone. Classy woman. Classy woman, right? So Janet made her passage. Harold did his 3 months of grief and staying at home. And then, sure enough, he called on my grandmother. I think we need to call on one another a little more often, don't you? He called on my grandmother and he said, I'd like to court you. And they courted for, 3 months, 6 months. It was far too short in my middle school opinion. And they got married. And they had a beautiful life together. And they both retired soon after that and just, bought and sold properties and traveled and did all of these things. Now, what made that possible? It was not being in the reactive mind and emotion. It was transcending into those higher levels of soul purpose consciousness. Unconditional love, infinite possibility, all of the things that are in front of us after the most dire and tragic circumstances that would have wiped out most people, right? But that's what we are called to do now in the face of what we're looking at. A lot of uncertainty, a new era in American politics, a new era in our culture. But what are we called to do? I'll tell you the third thing that I think. One of the things I love about unity is this whole notion of the Holy Trinity. Do you know how we identify the Holy Trinity in unity? Mind, idea, expression. Mind, idea, expression. It's one of my favorite teachings in the unity movement. And you could follow this up and do a whole sermon just on that, right? It's just awesome, yeah. But what it means is mind. So not like my little yama individual mind. Don't follow that one too far, right? You can see where that one has gotten you. So not the little yama mind, but the mind the mind of God. The mind of God that we are. The mind of God that created the galaxies that are 2 billion light years away from us that also created me. You see, the mind of God is just responsible to create life. What we're responsible for is to create our experience of life. The mind of God creates life. We experience our creation of life, our experience of life, right? It's awesome. So tapping into the mind of God. When you actually live your life interested in the mind of God, Einstein said, I want to know the mind of God. Everything else is just the details. Isn't that a profound quote? I want to know the mind of God. Everything else is just the details. So what's going on around us this week? I know it's kind of hard because they feel like they're like this big details. They're details. In the mind of God, they're details. So you tap into the mind of God, and then what happens when you're in that flow and you've transcended emotion, you've transcended your intellect, you're in this place of awakening, and you're just open, you're connected to the mind of God? What happens is you get really smart. You get amazing ideas. You get flooded with this inspiration, the spirit within. And instead of blocking it off with all the ego machinations that you do of, oh, I'm not that, and I'm not smart enough, or I'm too old, or I'm too young, or I'm just not sexy enough. Fortunately, I have not had that problem. Yeah. Anyway, so you tap into the mind of God and you get flooded with divine ideas. Divine ideas. But then what do most of you do? Oh, well, that must be nice for Jackie because she's sexy, but I don't think I can do that. It's such crap. You get flooded with divine ideas, and then you talk yourself out of it, and you go right back to that loop. You're all clumped up with emotion. And then you get lost in your intellect and all these reasons why and why not, and what'll they think, and what's the economy going to do, and blah, 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 blah. And when you do that, you don't get this next piece, which is so delicious, expression. See, that's the way it's supposed to work. You clear out your energetic consciousness by elevating out of emotion and elevating beyond your negative thought patterns, awakening to your divinity. And then you get flooded because you connect with the mind of God. You get flooded with ideas and inspiration. And then when you stay in that space, the natural outgrowth of that is expression. You want to go do stuff in the world. And that's what we're called to do. See, I know in the unity movement, there's a lot of this is God's will and God's in charge and I'm not political and all that. But I have just a little insight about that. You have a body. You've incarnated in this physical realm. Therefore, act here. Mind, idea, and the third part is expression. Bring forth the God force energy that's within you. If not, you will not be fulfilling the Holy Trinity that we espouse and believe. Mind, idea, and expression. So this week as we move into, this continued exploration and experiment, it's one of the things that Alexander Hamilton called the founding of this nation. They called it the Great Experiment in creating America. And here we are today, 2,000 years later, and we're still creating, 2016 years later, we are still creating this country, the great human experiment. But how we're going to create it is the important part. And if you create it from that lower part of yourself, that emotional reactivity, that intellect that's buying into the mass consciousness thought that's going on, we know what that's going to look like. We have the ability to choose. We choose our thoughts. We choose our emotions, even when we have to elevate and transcend them. And then as we tap into the mind of God, we choose our divine actions. And how you know what they are is it's what lights you up. It's like what you're passionate about. If you're passionate about being on Twitter, go tweet, at real Donald Trump. Here's the world I envision. There was a trending hashtag last week. If you don't know what that means, it just means a topic that's happening on Twitter. The world that I wish for. So, if you're into social media, I know most of you aren't, but I'm just going to go there. If you're into social media, go tweet out and put on Facebook the world that you envision. If you're a writer, go write about this. If you're a teacher, go teach about this. If you've got time on your hands, go find some place that you're called to volunteer about this. But the last thing you want to do is get back into that cycle and be brought down to that negative place of emotion. What will keep you out of it is to recognize that you are a spiritual being having a human experience engaged in the mind of God, or you're going to be subsumed by your ego. You're a spiritual being having a human experience engaged with the mind of God, being flooded with ideas, with enthusiasm, and theos, the God within. Inspiration, inspiritos, the spirit within. Feeling that, bringing that forth, knowing what's yours to do, and then instead of talking yourself out of it, taking those actions. 7 years ago, I had a full-time private practice. I was a psychotherapist in central Massachusetts. I'm fluent in American Sign Language, and it was wicked easy to start a private practice. I'd been in practice for about 20 years, and I just felt that existential call that, God kept saying in my journaling, go teach what you know. Go teach what you know. And I was like, do you have a business plan that goes with that? So that was my existentially. And, for several years, I no thanks. And I did all those things I'm telling you not to do. I was given by fear. I was saying, yeah, not me. And then finally, just enough circumstances came together, and I did it. I closed my private practice. I started my speaking business. And I'll tell you, the first 2 years, I really had to practice what I'm teaching you right now. It was not pretty. But my faith won. I remember sitting at Christmas time thinking, oh my gosh, I'm going to have to get a job, because I just wasn't making it. A couple of years into it, and I'm running out of money, and I'm going to have to get a job. And I was like, no, hold on to what you believe. Tap into the mind of God. And literally within a week, I fulfilled a request for proposal for a publishing company that launched my first book, and I haven't looked back since then. God will always show up as you when you show up as God. Tweet that one out, baby. God will always show up as you when you show up as God. So let's take that into our hearts right now, knowing that the truth of who we are is that we are divine. We are God and one with God. And let's bring that into our meditation. So just go ahead and center yourselves now into this now moment. Just take a breath. Just check in with yourself right now. Check in with your energy. How are you feeling your body right now? Is there any tension, any place? If there is, just go ahead and breathe into that and release and let it go. If you came here this morning with any worry, any concern, any care, just let that go. Just release it into the ethers, into the sea of no-thingness, to the ethereal nature that God is and that we are. So let's take into a moment to dwell on this thought. Look around at how lucky we are to be alive right now. History is happening, and we are right here creating this great human experiment. You are one with God. God seeks expression in this world through each and every one of us evolving out of fear and into love, evolving out of beyond self-interest and into oneness and unity, wholeness and compassion. And this great human experiment occurs as each of us carves our own way, finds our own unique God force, God self expression, whether it's in ministry or music, service, creating inventions, creating new experiences, connecting with other people. We all have our unique God force expression. We're each the fingerprint of God in this beautiful mass sea of consciousness. And your consciousness seeks expression. Say that to yourself. My consciousness seeks expression. My God self seeks expression in this world. Feel the energetic vibration of that. My God self is seeking expression right here, right now. And that expression is going to look different at different times of your life. Sometimes it'll be seeking expression as a parent. Sometimes it'll be seeking expression as a business owner, but it's always seeking expression as a person of love, a person of peace, a person of unity. So I invite you now, as we go into a moment's silence, to just look right now, today, what is mine to do as my God self seeks expression in this great human experiment this week, this month, and in this new phase going forward. Take that question now into the silence. how lucky we are to be alive right now. And we say thank you, God, for this experience together, this community, this oneness and this love. We commit to this path as we move forward from this day. And so it is. Amen.
You have been watching the message from our Sunday celebration service here at Unity on Cape Cod, providing a positive path for spiritual living. Please join us every Sunday morning at 10 a.m. at 147 Walton Ave, Hyannis, Mass. And visit us online at www.unityoncapecod.org.